This episode of the Cult Popture podcast was brought to you by our Patreon. If you want to tell us which films we should watch or get 2 extra exclusive podcasts a month, then please consider becoming a patron and joining us at www.patreon.com/cultpopture. So I just assumed you would let me do half, but no. Okay.
Let's go again.
No. We've started the episode. Welcome to
the Cult Popture podcast. That's not even the tune. Just got off completely. Welcome to the Cult Popture podcast. Specifically, welcome to film franchise Fortnights on the Cult Popture podcast.
Welcome to this episode of film franchise Fortnights.
Exactly. My name is AJ,
and specifically, my name is Richard.
And today, it's funny that, specifically your name is Richard, but not specifically my name is AJ. That's actually true. Generally speaking, my name is AJ, but specifically my name is Alexander. But we don't need to go into that.
Specifically, it's Alexander Robert Jones.
Oh, stop it.
Do you know my middle names?
Well, actually, specifically you're Richard Malcolm Patterson Martin, right?
Very nice, yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Look at us.
So this is Film Franchise Fortnights, where every fortnight we talk about a film franchise that is either randomly decided or voted on by our patrons over at patreon.com/cultpopture. And this is one of the latter. This is one of the latter examples where people voted on and selected us to do a little trilogy, Richard, called
just a little trilogy.
The Man with No Name trilogy, or the Dollars trilogy, or the Blood Money trilogy. Take your pick.
I've never heard the Blood Money trilogy.
No.
I've heard Dollars and Man with No Name.
I kind of like Blood Money better than the others, though.
Yeah, because both the other two are like misnomers, because he has a name in every film, and dollars are only in the title of 2 of the films.
But they're all about blood money.
Yeah, exactly.
The Blood Money trilogy, fuck it. The Blood Money trilogy is an Italian film series consisting of 3 spaghetti westerns directed by Sergio Leone?
I've heard Leone.
Leone? Yeah, I have too.
But I decided to go against what I've heard.
No, they're known for establishing the spaghetti western genre and inspiring the creation of many more spaghetti western films.
And I would just like to add as well that the 3 films are consistently listed among the best rated westerns in film history.
That's not what I was going to say.
Fuck. Yeah, it was.
They star Clint Eastwood in his breakout role as the Man with No Name / the Man with a Name, but more on that later.
The Man with a Name trilogy.
So the films in particular are A Fistful of Dollars, a few dollars more, and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Richard, this has got to be one of the most highbrow franchises we've covered on Film Franchise
probably,
Fortnights.
yeah.
Next to Lord of the Rings, maybe, this is the only franchise we've done that has consisted of what your granddad considered, true cinema.
Yeah, but they're also, they're not like Oscar films as well.
No, they weren't nominated for anything, were they?
No, these are the spaghetti western's kind of a weird genre like that, at the time it was a little bit like, oh yeah, and now they're the ones that stood the test of time.
Very, very cool. Very, very good point. So the first film in the series that we watched was called A Fistful of Dollars. This came out in 1964 in Italy, and I don't think it came out I think they all came out in the same year in America, which is 1967. I could be wrong on that, though. But A Fistful of Dollars was directed by Sergio Leone, and guess what this has on Rotten Tomatoes?
I'm guessing they're all between 90 and 100.
They are.
I'm going to guess, let's say 98.
98, very good. And I've stopped being amazed at you guessing, because you must be cheating. You must be doing something, because you get it so right each time.
Oh, stop it.
This film has been unidentified. This film has been identified.
This film has been unidentified. People
for years.
Scholars have studied this film, and no one's been able to tell what it is.
It's been identified as an unofficial remake of the Akira Kurosawa film Yojimbo from 1961.
Yo,
Jimbo.
Yeah.
which resulted in a lawsuit by Toho, Yojimbo's production company, which is, how many times has Toho come up on this podcast?
Yeah, is this
before?
like the second time, with the second film franchise in which Toho's lawyers were involved?
Yeah. After Godzilla, of course, if that is the only, I feel like we might have done more Toho stuff. I feel like I just remember seeing Toho outside of Godzilla. All right, Richard, now I've got one of the hardest questions I will ever ask you. What is this movie about?
All right, so Clint Eastwood plays the man with no name, also called, what is it, Joe in this film?
Yeah.
Who he rolls into town and finds out about these two families who both want control of the town, and so he like pits them against each other to make money off them, and then also like protects someone from them.
Now, why was that the hardest question I've ever had to ask you on this podcast?
Because like neither of us really followed what was going on in this film.
I am so worried. You know, we're a film podcast, and here we are, Fistful of Dollars. Quentin Tarantino's favorite film, or one of them, apparently,
Really nice.
according to some very cool IMDb trivia. And yeah, man, this, out of all the films we've ever watched on this podcast, this is the one I followed the least.
Yeah, like this is one where I got halfway through the film and I was like, fuck, have I not been paying attention? I don't know what this film's about.
I
then watching,
I feel like I was paying attention. I just wasn't consuming the plot.
Yeah. It's
being
on, but you're
thrown
not.
at me.
Like, you know, when you're like reading a book and you get to the end of a page and you're like, wait a minute, I didn't take in any of that. And you have to start that page again because you were just looking at the words, you weren't actually reading them. It was like that. And so when I watched For a Few Dollars More, I was like, fuck, I'm actually going to have to rewatch A Fistful of Dollars.
Did you?
No. I was going to watch Yojimbo, though.
Oh, okay. Nice.
And see if I followed that more, even though it's in a foreign language.
Yeah, man, this movie, I'm sure it's as good as everyone says, but just something about the conditions in which I watched it, it got to the point where I could tell you what the other two movies are about in a sentence. I actually couldn't tell you what A Fistful of Dollars is about.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I looked up the synopsis and I was like, that's what it's about? There's rivaling families, and like it just completely washed over me, and I didn't get any of it at all. So sorry to, I think, Alexander who suggested this, not me, another Alexander,
but it's
who
funny,
suggested this on Patreon.
Like you mentioned about it not being, you obviously weren't in the right place to watch this movie. I think probably the best way to consume this movie is in a hot tub in an alternate 1985 with two beautiful women just before your son-in-law comes in.
Is it in Back to the Future?
And accuses you of stealing Grey Sports Almanac, at which point you have to pause the film and say, you heard him, ladies, party's over.
Wow. So another Back to the Future tie.
Yeah, this is our second film to feature a second film franchise to feature a clip from A Fistful of Dollars. But yeah, great flick.
Our second film franchise to also feature either a character or actor named Clint Eastwood.
Nice.
Or at least someone going by. No, an actor going by Clint Eastwood. There you go. All right, well, we'll talk a bit more about it in a second, but let's get through these other synopses first. In 1965, in Italy, a year later, we had For a Few Dollars More, also directed by Sergio Leone. What do you think this has on Rotten Tomatoes?
93.
91, which offends me that A Fistful of Dollars is rated higher than For a Few Dollars More, because I enjoyed this one immensely. A fun little tidbit, fun little fact about For a Few Dollars More. There is a parody of this film called For a Few Dollars Less, which was made in 1966 in Italy and was the last of 86 films to be directed by Italian filmmaker Mario Mattoli between 1934 and 1966.
Nice.
What does a 1960s Italian scary movie look like?
Yeah.
I'm very intrigued.
There's also, do you know, Edgar Wright's first film was called A Fistful of Fingers. It's like a setup of westerns, and but it's very like student film kind of thing.
Yeah. All right, so this should be a bit easier to describe. What is For a Few Dollars More about?
So you have Clint Eastwood is back as the man with no name named Manco, and he he ends up teaming up with it. He's a bounty hunter, and he ends up teaming up with another bounty hunter to collect the bounty on the heads of this group of bank robbers. Specifically, there's like a ringleader who they're after, but then they realize they can get a lot more money if they work together. So I think Clint and the other bounty hunter is Lee Van Cleef, and they Clint infiltrates the gang, and Lee sort of like follows alongside. But then they also realize that like if they let them steal the money, they'll also get a reward for returning the money. So yeah,
look, it's so much better than
it's insane.
I was like, this is great. I was following it. I was paying attention, and it was I quite enjoyed this one.
Yeah.
So that's that. We've probably got a lot less to say about it just because we understood it more. So in 1966 in Italy, and I'm assuming 1967 if they all came out in this. I should have looked that up. I'm sorry. We got The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, directed by Sergio Leone. What do you think this has on Rotten Tomatoes?
Be like 98 as well.
It's got 97, meaning that A Fistful of Dollars is the highest rated of the trilogy.
Wow. That's insane.
Absurd.
Yeah.
So due to a general disapproval of the spaghetti western genre at the time, critical reception of the film following its release was mixed, but it gained critical acclaim in the later years. The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is now seen as one of the greatest and most influential western movies. And what is it about, Richard?
So this one, you have The Good, which is Clint Eastwood, The Bad. Well, and so he's called Blondie in this film. The Bad is Angel Eyes, who's Lee Van Cleef again, and then you have the Ugly, who's Tuco.
Yeah, Tuco.
And then, so the Good and the Ugly end up having to like team up to find this buried treasure that's buried in a graveyard because one of them knows the name of the grave and the other one knows the name of the cemetery, so that they can't find it. Just one of them, and then also hot on their heels is the Bad, who's like a ruthless
Angel Eyes,
yeah, who is after them, and then ends in a famous Mexican standoff.
The Mexican standoff, and it's got the famous music, the da 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 wah wah wah. That was a very unmotivated rendition of it.
Wah wah wah
wah wah wah. It's got the long takes and the wide shots of everyone standing in the West. It's the one where you see people flicking their fingers towards their gun and standing in standoffs and like close-ups of their eyes staring at each other. This is Western, the movie, This is where all your ideas of Westerns come from, basically. So those are the three movies. Richard, what did you think of them and which was your favorite?
Do you want to know what I actually thought of them? So Rotten Tomatoes ranks these Fistful, Good, the Bad, and the Ugly for a few dollars more.
Yeah.
I am the opposite of that. My favorite was For a Few Dollars More, and then The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, and then Fistful of Dollars.
Wow.
I think as good as The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is, it could be tighter. And I know that there's an argument for that it's like, no, that's the whole thing. It's like about atmosphere. But the kind of it's not like the middle hour, but maybe before 45 minutes before the end of the hour before that kind of lost me a little bit. For a few dollars more, it was just a really straightforward, fun to watch and not too long as well. Yeah. And I really enjoyed that. But there's so much iconic imagery in The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, and the Mexican standoff at the end is absolutely fantastic. And it's how much it keeps your attention and keeps you on the edge of your seat when it's literally 5 minutes of cutting between people's eyes, faces, and hands.
Clint Eastwood agrees with you, apparently. Clint Eastwood doesn't like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Or at least he said it was bloated and didn't think they nailed it. And there's also a film critic who wrote the biography, I can't remember his name, but he wrote the biography of Clint Eastwood, in which he also ascertains that For a Few Dollars More is the best of the trilogy. I disagree. Well, not anymore, because I disagree.
No, that doesn't, dilute the quality of the company I'm in.
Oh, thanks, man. Was that a compliment for me?
No. No, I'm saying I'm in
choosing-
good company, and you're like, well, not anymore because I disagree. And I'm like, well, my company's still good. In fact, it's
But
even
I'm
better
literally
than
your
you're
company right now.
Yeah, no, but like that director, that
That
writer,
club.
yeah, little club.
Right. No, my favorite is easily The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I found, as I said, I found A Fistful of Dollars harder to follow than any film we've watched on this podcast. And I enjoyed for a few dollars more, and I thought it was a big step up, but I was still not really that into it. But, like, I consider, like, despite how, like, lukewarm I am on the first two films, for me, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is, like, one of the best movies ever made. I reckon. I love it so much.
I think like for me as well, that coming up A Fistful of Dollars, I was like, fuck, am I just not going to like these films? Because I like, I hadn't really read anything about this, so I don't know what people generally think, but I knew they were all highly regarded about the same level, but Good, the Bad, and the Ugly was slightly higher. And so I was like, fuck, what if I just like I don't like any of these, and I was real scared, especially because knowing that one of them is 3 hours long. I'm like, oh my god, I'm not gonna be able to follow it. It's gonna be too long. And then I watched for a few dollars more, and I was like, fuck yeah! Like I'm so on board with these movies now. And then The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, like I say, it just kind of like it lost me in some parts.
Yeah, I think it's just such a Moorish movie. I've written here. That's the word I'd use to describe it. Like, this is the movie equivalent of getting one of those massive gobstoppers from the dairy when you're a kid and just sucking on it all day. Like, just really relishing something that takes ages to eat. Like, it's slow and meandering to the point where you could probably fall asleep for about 20 minutes or so at any point of the film, wake up and not need any catching up. Like, you just wake up and be like, okay, sweet. Like, each scene is so enjoyable on its own. And I think I find this movie really relaxing.
Oh, yeah.
I think it does something I've never seen another movie do, where you could actually put it on in the background, do your ironing or whatever, and it's like you would still receive as much greatness as you would if you were paying 100% attention to it. That's why I like it so much.
Right.
It's like the marriage between casual watching and true film for me.
Yeah. I will say as well that one thing that I sort of obviously I knew some stuff going into these movies, like about Clint Eastwood and how iconic it was and everything like that. But one thing I'd seen but didn't really know much about was Lee Van Cleef, who's like the other bounty hunter in $50 More, and he's also the bad and the good, the bad, and the ugly. And then so after watching Fistful of Dollars, not really liking it that much, and then watching for a few dollars more, I was like, this is the series' secret weapon. Yeah, he was fantastic. Right. I love him, man.
Yeah. I do too. So, Richard, we've used the term spaghetti western, or as I like to call them, spagooter westerns.
Is there a story behind that?
No, just like calling spaghetti spagooter. We haven't really explained what that is, and you messaged me the other day and you're like, are you going to explain what a spaghetti western is? And I was like, I don't know, I guess. And you were like, I'll do it. And I was like, okay. So, Richard, what is a spaghetti western?
Well, I don't have like a concise... I started to write like a concise, thing, but I thought, I'll just chuck it off the top of my head. But anyway, so spaghetti westerns or Italian westerns or macaroni westerns in Japan. It's westerns that are filmed for cheap in Italy and primarily in Italian as well, which is why... But the whole cast isn't necessarily Italian, but like half of them are, which is why some people are really poorly dubbed in these films and some aren't. And that often star like a faded Hollywood star or an up-and-comer like Clint Eastwood, and that's how he got his big break. But then it ended up being that... this like essentially cheap labor and easy way to make films became... when you think of westerns, you think of the good, the bad, and the ugly, and it's like they ended up making the best one. But yeah, it is Sergio Leone and like Clint Eastwood are obviously the two names that you associate with a western, and it's just quite funny how that all started out.
Yeah. And I think if a western is filmed in New Zealand, it's a Pavlova western. I've heard that term before.
Nice.
Like Slow West with Michael Fassbender
nice.
Pavlova western. So A Fistful of Dollars was intended by Leone to reinvent the western genre in Italy. In his opinion, the American westerns of the mid to late 1950s had become stagnant, overly preachy, and not believable. So apparently... I didn't know this. By the time that A Fistful of Dollars came out, Hollywood were kind of over westerns. which is interesting that like what I would think of as the quintessential Western came out so long
Yeah, there was
after.
600 spaghetti westerns made between 1960 and 1978.
Wow.
It's so many. 18 years, 600 European westerns, I should say.
Yeah. Well, because that's the thing is that apparently Leone was like, yeah, America's sick of it, but Europe still loves them.
Yeah.
And like apparently the Italian audiences liked both genuinely enjoyed the film, but also liked seeing verbose stereotypes of American characters and stuff like that.
But it's funny that he was like, I'm going to reinvent the genre, and he just stole a Kurosawa film. Because there was actually like, it was quite a big, I think eventually, because, he didn't, it's not an official remake, he just stole the plot and stuff like that. And I think he ended up having to like relinquish the rights. So I think Kurosawa got the Japanese, or like Toho got the Japanese rights to the film, and then also 15% of the worldwide box office. But I saw a quote from Kurosawa who's like, yeah, no, it's a good film. It's my film.
Yeah, Kurosawa made more money off A Fistful of Dollars than he did off Yojimbo as well.
Nice.
So that's what a spaghetti western is, and that's what we're talking about, or have been talking about so far today. But Richard, this isn't a podcast about genres. The mistake I made 2 weeks ago might suggest otherwise, but no, this is a podcast about franchises. And is the Man with No Name trilogy even a franchise? Because Richard, this might be our least official franchise since Big Fat Liar.
That's not too far back. I thought you were going to say the Red Curtain trilogy.
No, the Red Curtain trilogy was like made with intention to be connected. Whereas while each film,
Big Fat Liar.
I guess so. Yeah, but yeah, you know what I mean though. We were very angry at doing Bigger Fat Liar because it was so barely counting as a sequel. So yeah, each film was used to like subsequently finance and market the next, but Leone's intention for the three movies was not necessarily for them to be considered a trilogy. The Man with No Name concept was invented by the American distributor United Artists, looking for an angle to sell the movies as a trilogy, right? So
nice.
It's depending how it's almost like Word of God canon, because it's like, do you trust the director who's just like, we just made three westerns with similar casts and similar titles,
and
or
the
do
same
you trust
pros and same character essentially?
Yeah. Well, that's the thing is, and we'll get more into that later. But do you trust the United Artists who were like, yeah, it's a trilogy? It's the like. I don't think it was. This is me speculating, but I don't think Leone was like, the Man with No Name is returned. It was more like, we're going to make another one, and then United Artists were like, oh, can we say the Man with No Name is back? And he's like, yeah, sure. It's like not really caring about it. Almost as the vibe I get from reading up.
It's interesting because you look at something like the Red Curtain trilogy or like the Cornetto trilogy, like Edgar Wright's ones. That I would say these are more connected than those, because it is like, like if Hot Fuzz and The World's End both starred Simon Pegg, who worked at the like cell phone warehouse and wore a white button-up shirt and had like "Hello, my name is," and it was scratched out. In every film, that's essentially what it is. It's like you're keeping the main character across three completely separate adventures, and there's no indication in any of these films that the other films happened as well. If I'm recalling correctly. Yeah, so it's a very strange thing. Like, it's strange to dress your character the exact same and have him essentially act the same way and not call it a trilogy. But yeah, I like the idea that this guy, he's just kind of like a drifter who just goes from town to town and wreaks a bit of havoc, and then and it never references his past adventures.
You may have made up your mind there, Richard, but the question is Clint Eastwood playing the same character in each movie as one hell of an internet rabbit hole to fall down at 1:30 a.m. because this is a mess of conversation on the internet. There are angry, as I said, there's like a lot of Word of God canon. There's a lot of angry commenters who are stating their opinions or unconfirmed rumors as facts. They'll be like, yeah, well, this is what da-da-da said. And it's like, You can't just say this is what someone said and then not
it's like
provide a
Earbud
source.
Down Under all over again.
There are loads of people arguing that the films are connected, loads of people arguing they aren't, and even a couple arguing that like the second one isn't, but the first one is, and the third one is acting as a retcon to connect the first two together.
Yeah, I'd heard that the third one, like years ago, I think I'd heard that like the third one is a remake of the first two. Or something like that, but then it ended up not being true. But yeah.
No. I even found an uncertified claim on IMDb that Leone, and this could be true, and I found another website talking about it, but I couldn't find like anything that I felt was like official enough to be certifiable. Leone had a falling out with the producers of the first film before he made the second, and as such, he apparently won a case in a court of law by arguing that Eastwood's character in the first film was not the same character in the second. Like, that was how they won the case, and is instead a public domain archetype of the Western cowboy persona. I don't know if that's true, but it's a very interesting spin on this argument. And as we mentioned before, Eastwood's character does indeed have a different name in each film, and the first one is called Joe. He's only called it once, and it's very like, what the fuck? Like the like funeral, the guy who builds coffins is like, Joe! And I was like, what? That's how I thought it was like in it more, because I'd heard that his name was Joe in the first one, but it's funny to see it play out. Manco is his name in the second film, and Blondie is in the third film. However, like, Blondie is obviously a nickname because Tuco doesn't know his name. But
Manco, they like make it a point of pointing out that he has a name, like, and his name is ... Manco.
Well, it's funny you should mention that, because Manco is actually Spanish for one arm, because Eastwood's always got one arm on his gun under his poncho, so he does everything with his left.
Nice, yeah, because it's still a nickname, yeah,
exactly. So it's a nickname. So if we can assume, Richard, that his real name is Joe, and Blondie and Manco are just nicknames, then it is feasible that he is playing the same character. But then all three films also feature recurring actors, and everyone except Clint Eastwood is clearly meant to be a different person. The most notable being Lee Van Cleef, who is the second most important character in the second
not even
two
the
films.
first one.
Yeah. So, I mean, if Van Cleef is playing different roles, then why can't Eastwood be playing different roles? You know, these are the questions. That being said, there is obviously some internal consistency between the first two films. I mean, their titles are clearly playing off each other, but again, that could just be a marketing campaign. You know,
because is that actually what they translate to in Italian?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. But probably the biggest smoking gun in the he's the same character camp is the fact that Eastwood's character finds his poncho by the end of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, which brings me to my next point, Richard. One thing that makes this franchise pretty relevant to recent cult popular conversations is that The Good and the Bad and the Ugly is considered a prequel. Since it depicts Eastwood's character gradually acquiring his clothes, as I just said, that he wears in the first two films, and because it takes place during the American Civil War, which was 1861 to 1865, where the other two films feature comparatively more modern firearms and props. Like there's Lee Van Cleef's character, and for a few dollars more as a Confederate veteran, and there's a graveyard and a fistful of dollars, which features a gravestone dated 1873, which means it's after the Civil War. So, is The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly a good, bad, or ugly prequel, Richard?
Well, I like the idea that they all kind of take place in like a cyclical timeline. And it's like these are just snapshots of things that could happen. They're like old. It's a weird thing, and I don't know that there's another franchise like it. But they're all kind of like alternate like takes of what could have happened, like in like a weird way. And they all happened and they all didn't, and it's like this weird floating timeline.
Yeah,
that's how I imagine it.
Nice.
Yeah, like I can quite easily just not think about it too much, you know?
Yeah, of course. But I mean, this is called Popture, right?
Yeah,
so we're
exactly.
like, think about it. Because I would argue The Good, the Bad, the Ugly is the best of the series, and maybe the best film, which is technically a prequel, but I think it's probably a bad prequel, which maybe makes it an ugly prequel. Because like knowing that the man with no name survives spoils the ending, because it is legitimately up in the air during that Mexican standoff.
Yeah, it was cool watching that Mexican standoff, because I was like, I've seen this so many times, I actually don't know what happens.
Yeah.
Like, it made me realize that like halfway through, I was like, wait a minute, I don't know who gets shot here.
Yeah, but then like it's just the bad guy gets shot. It's like, oh, that was good. But this also throws another wrench in the are they even the same character argument, because why would Blondie, now incredibly rich by the end of The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, then risk his life for hauls of money twice later on in his life? You know, you'd think he'd be like, I'm set, I don't need to like put myself in situations where he very does nearly die, where he very nearly does nearly die. That's a weird way to say that. You know, several times across the preceding films. But another fun fact about that poncho, that poncho, Richard,
the poncho,
is that apparently you can see the bullet holes made in the first film in Eastwood's poncho in the second film. They're like stitched up and he's wearing it back to front. So is the poncho the key to all of this?
Well, that's because he actually it's the same poncho across all three films. Like in the real world, Clint Eastwood wore the same poncho and never washed it.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, it's just Clint Eastwood's poncho, so maybe it isn't anything, and it's less about internal
maybe
consistency and more
if Clint Eastwood wasn't so sentimental about that poncho, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. Because apart from that, you know, it's just Clint Eastwood starred in 3 westerns.
I'm moving to rename this trilogy, the Poncho Trilogy, because that seems like the main piece of continuity.
Yeah,
across
should we add that to the Wikipedia? Also known as the Blood Money Trilogy or the Poncho Trilogy.
The Eastwood Poncho Trilogy. Yeah, so that's the big conversation. Is this a franchise? And I think because we've had this conversation, I think it's enough of a reason to have the talk about it on this podcast. So I'm all good with considering it a franchise. I'm sure you are too. But one thing that we like to talk about other than franchises on this podcast, Richard, is titles. And usually I'd be pretty upset that the dollars motif was dropped from the last film. But because of all the skepticism about whether it is actually a trilogy or not, I'm not too bothered that The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is called something completely different to the other two. But when it was being released in America, this is of note, there were a couple of titles that nearly got picked, because in Italian it was called The Good, the Ugly, and the Bad, which is weird to go in that order.
Yeah.
Well, you know, obviously in Italian maybe it meant something else.
Yeah.
But yeah, they were trying to think of a title for the American version if they weren't going to call it The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And one of them was just The Man with No Name.
That's a good title,
and one of them was River of Dollars.
Oh, yeah.
So it could have been another Dollars movie.
River of Dollars is a stupid title.
Yeah, I don't know why it'd be called that.
Yeah.
There's no...
I'm sure there is a river. You could add, like, grave full of dollars.
Yeah. The working title for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly was The Two Magnificent Tramps, which may seem a little left field until you consider the fact that the original title for A Fistful of Dollars was The Magnificent Stranger. So maybe this could have been The Magnificent Trilogy.
And they could have made 7 of them.
Yeah. This came out after The Magnificent Seven as well. So clearly Magnificent was like a word people associated with westerns.
Yeah. Do you reckon Kurosawa's pissed off that, like, they got all these westerns made from his films? Because Magnificent Seven is a remake of Seven Samurai.
True. It's
and I'm
interesting.
pretty sure there's actually a Rashomon is remade as a western.
It's interesting, isn't it, that like Japanese classic cinema and Western cinema have these weird kinships despite being quite different kind of feels to them.
Yeah, there's a movie called The Outrage, which is a 1950 Western, or it's a 1964 Western, which is a remake of Rashomon.
Wow. What is it? Is it because samurai? Is it because the cowboys are the American samurai?
I guess, yeah.
Yeah. I guess they are. I guess it's not actually that different after all.
I guess we're all just the same.
Yeah. We need to set aside our differences and make one world Western. Forget spaghetti. Forget pavlova.
Forgetty
the spaghetti.
Forget about it.
The forget about it Western. Imagine if they called it that. What other countries would be called? What would a Western be called in other countries? Like, are they is like Seven Samurai like a sushi Western?
Well, I think it's just a samurai film.
Yeah. Yeah, I just like categories.
Speaking of titles as well, so Sergio Leone made 2 like unofficial trilogies. You know about there's also the Once Upon a Time trilogy, which is Once Upon a Time in the West is the first one, and Once Upon a Time in America is the third one. Do you know what the second one's called?
What?
It's called Duck, You Sucker.
Yeah, I saw that. It's Duck. Of course, it's Duck, You Sucker. I thought it was Duck, You Sucker. I was like, that's a strange title.
Duck, You Sucker. But that was also known as like Once Upon a Time ... The Revolution, or A Fistful of Dynamite.
Oh, you're kidding me. Well, I also read that Clint Eastwood nearly starred in Once Upon a Time in the West.
Nice.
And so, would that have made it? You know,
well, it depends on if he's like, I'll only do it if I can bring my poncho, and Sergio's like, oh my god, enough with the fucking poncho.
The poncho is what it all comes down to, dude. All right, so we're going to move on to a little segment now, Richard, called Dumb IMDb Trivia.
Cool, and then this will segue. I also have a little segue I want to take. Just remind me to do it.
I'll remind you to take a segue.
Yeah, thanks.
So, as we explain, whenever we do dumb IMDb trivia, IMDb trivia is user suggested, meaning that people can put whatever they want in the trivia section, and it doesn't really get, what's the word?
Moderated.
Moderated, yeah. It's just, you could put in it, Clint Eastwood stars in this film and two others like it, therefore making it an unofficial trilogy. And even though two other people have written that already, it'll just end up in the trivia section. So this is a piece of trivia from A Fistful of Dollars. So apparently, Richard, A Fistful of Dollars is the only film in the Dollars trilogy where the man with no name is the protagonist. For a few dollars more, it is Colonel Mortimer's story, and for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, it's Tuco's story.
I mean, okay, if you want to define it like that.
Yeah, what a weird thing to just say with like command, like I am deciding that these are this person's story, because it's very, it's up in the air basically. Like it's not definitely Colonel Mortimer's story, and it's certainly not definitely Tuco's story.
Yeah.
The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. So I just thought that one made me angry. That was a piece of angering IMDb trivia, because I was like, this isn't true.
Trivia.
Yeah. All right, you wanted to do a segue, Richard.
Is that your one piece?
Yeah.
Let me just...
I don't know if you remembered, but you said, can I do a segue? And I was like, yep.
I'm just trying to see if I can... Okay, so watching these films made me think of one of the funniest exchanges I've seen on Reddit. So there was a post, it was an Ask Reddit post. It's called, what kind of things would Trader Joe's sell? Because, you have Trader Joe's, traitor, he's a traitor. And someone was like, cowboy boots, but the spurs are on the inside. And then someone was like, Da Epicness 666, as his name was like, said the outside, not the inside. And then people were like, what? Like, and so someone said, whoosh, saying like the joke went over your head. And Da Epicness was like, bitch, how? Spurs are for riding horses. You kick the horse with the spurs. If the spurs are on the medial side of the shoe, you can still kick them into the horse. But if they're on the lateral side, outside, you can't use them. Don't you ever whoosh me again, you crusty ass Homo erectus bitch. And then someone said, whoosh with 4 O's. It's on the inside, or dig into your feet. And he said, I fixed my whoosh before you even commented, and that's just stupid. You couldn't put pointy things on the inside of any shoe, and it would fit the question, but if you're going to use spurs specifically, at least utilize some knowledge of how they work.
You could put anything pointy on the inside of a shoe. What a great defense.
And then he said, yes, you could put them on any shoe, but these shoes already have spikes. It's a joke. As the question is asked in humor, do you know what that is? He said, clearly more than you, since you think whoosh is funny. Let me see if this just keeps going and going.
Is this a famous thread, or is this
no? This is just what I saw a month ago, and I was like, "This is so funny." Except, are you sure about that? I have a sense of humor. You're getting angry over being whooshed. I'm sure you'll find people to get angry with, though. Are you not the one who originally had an issue with my joke? I wasn't getting angry. I just saying you missed the joke. I didn't though, except that you did. Except I didn't. You originally said that the spurs should be on the outside as to render them useless. However, the joke was referring it to being inside the boot, digging into the foot, not simply being useless. What I said made more sense in reference to the question because I was asking for traitorous objects, meaning that the object works in the exact opposite way that it's supposed to. Spurs are meant for horse riding, therefore any spurs can be utilized during the horse riding. A traitorous spurs, but putting them on the inside is stupid because all shoes are meant to keep your feet safe. So any shoes that hurt your feet are traitorous shoes. Therefore, using cowboy boots and spurs for this purpose is stupid because it misses a much more unique comedic perspective.
I kind of agree with him. Like, he's being a dick, but it's kind of impressive to see someone defend their joke so much.
Yeah, like
you could put anything pointy on the inside of any shoe. Why make it a cowboy boot and spurs if you could?
I didn't read this start because my phone doesn't, like, when I read it on my phone doesn't go this deep with the comments. But just the fact that he's like, "Oh, you fucking homo erectus bitch, don't even fucking wish me again." Because also someone that knows this much about cowboy boots, like the idea of what that person would be like. I'm gonna save this comment so I can revisit it.
Wow, that's really funny, man. I'm
glad I was able to find it because I honestly all week I was looking for that thread, but I couldn't remember what it was called, and then I managed to find it on Google just now.
Nice.
So yeah, spurs go on the medial side of the boot, so you can kick the horse.
What does medial mean?
Well, medial means the inside, lateral means the outside, I think.
Yeah. Is that boot terminology specifically, or
just I think it's foot terminology?
Oh, wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing what it was a very tenuously linked conversation to this episode, but I liked it. I enjoyed it a lot.
Well, it's just because there's so many shots of spurs. I was like, oh man.
There's a plot point involving a spur, even.
Yeah.
Yeah, where Blondie hears the spurs of some intruders and shoots them before he gets them. But then Two goes behind him and he spins his spurs and he's like, "Oh, I got you. Hey,
I got you, sucker."
While we're on plot points, do you have any favourite scenes or anything that you want to bring up?
Ooh, no.
Oh, good. One of the things I like about The Good, the Bad, the Ugly is that there's actually quite a few jokes in it, which is like Tuco's quite a great character, and overall I'd say The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, the characters are all some of the best. It's such a good ensemble of characters, you know, like they do so well, and they fit. They fit in the film and play off each other so well. One of my favourite moments in the film is when they see some soldiers marching towards them, and they're dressed in white, which means they're fighting for the South, I think. I could be wrong, because it's set in the Civil War. And they don't want to get, like, called up, so Tugo starts yelling out pro-South stuff to them, and he's like, "Yes, yeah, up with General, what's his name?" And Clint Eastwood's like, Lee, and he's like, "Up with General Lee." And then they get close to them, and they look at them, and they start patting down their suits, and they're actually wearing blue, which means they're from the North, I think, which means that they, you know, because they had dust all over their suits, it's made to look white, and that lands them in heaps of trouble because they were yelling out the wrong, you know, maybe if they'd just been quiet, they would have been able to pass on without anyone noticing. So I think that's really funny.
Yeah, it's funny as well. We should mention that the whole reason we're doing this franchise, I just remembered, is because of me. And because I confessed recently that I'd never actually seen a Clint Eastwood film until I saw The Mule, his latest directorial effort, which he also stars in. And I pointed out that he has 2 threesomes in that movie, and it's very strange. But now, watching these films, it makes total sense, because goddamn, that is one handsome man.
He kind of reminds me of my granddad. And
Your granddad's hot.
My granddad doesn't necessarily look like Clint Eastwood, but I think he likes westerns, and maybe I associate.
Oh, yeah,
I've always thought my granddad looks like a mix between Sean Connery and Dr. Cox from Scrubs, which kind of, if you think about it, looks like Clint Eastwood. Those two people mixed together kind of looks like Clint Eastwood, so maybe that's where I'm going from.
There was photos of Clint Eastwood's son, Scott Eastwood, who's very handsome but not a very good actor, got posted to Reddit one time, and it was like, this is Clint Eastwood's son, Scott, and the top comment was, Jesus Christ, who's his mum? Hugh Jackman?
Nice.
Because he's also incredibly handsome.
Richard, let's move on to our final segment of the show.
Franchise roulette.
Yep. Actually, no, I've changed my mind. Let's not do that just yet. Let's move on to continue the franchise.
Oh, okay, yeah, all right.
A penultimate section of the show. So this is a section of the show where we pitch sequels, we pitch whatever, a way to continue the franchise. And while the legacy of the trilogy has lived on in pop culture, and there are, novels about the man with no name, there is yet to be a fourth film in the series. However, screenwriter for the second two films, Luciano Vincenzoni, has stated on numerous occasions that he had written a treatment for a sequel tentatively titled Il Buono, Il Brutto, Il Cavito en Tu, which translates to the good, the bad, and the ugly too.
Yeah.
According to Vincenzoni and Eli Wallach, who played Tuco in the film, the film would have been set 20 years after the original and would have followed Tuco pursuing Blondie's grandson for the gold. Clint Eastwood expressed interest in taking part in the film's production, including acting as a narrator. Joe Dante was approached to direct, and Sergio Leone was approached to be a producer, which means that this is the... How many, Joe Dante did Gremlins and Gremlins 2.
That's right, yeah. And he's just announced a Gremlins animated series as well.
Yeah. And he also did Looney Tunes Back in Action.
That's right.
Eventually, however, the project was vetoed by Leone as he did not want the original film's title or characters to be reused, nor did he want to be involved in another Western film. Yeah, sure. I think I'm quite intrigued by that idea, though.
A straight up sequel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that it's set 20 years later, I find all that very interesting.
Yeah.
Would you need a new bad?
Probably.
Or does the ghost of Angel Eyes? Yes.
Angel Ghost.
So, all right, Richard. Do you want to go first? Shall I go first? I have a sneaking suspicion we've got the same idea. But
a Logan-style send-off to the
that
man
wasn't
with
my
no
idea
name.
at all.
No, I mean, I just it'd be cool to see, even just as a fun little Easter egg, to have Clint Eastwood in a Western again. You know,
I mean, I think he would consider his current films to probably be Westerns that he's starring
the Mule. Yeah, the Mule. Yeah.
Gran Torino is like a modern Western, I think.
Yeah, but it would be cool if they made a proper callback Western, with kind of a schlocky title, or even getting back into the spaghetti Westerns, and you give Clint Eastwood a little cameo, maybe even as a narrator.
Wow.
That's my continue the franchise is making a new Western. And
what is Clint Eastwood's deal? I feel like he's not a very good guy. Am I correct?
Well, I mean, it depends on what you think of Republicans. Yeah, he's quite strongly Republican, although I don't think he's necessarily a massive supporter of Donald Trump. But yeah, there's that famous weird thing of him, he was at some Republican conference and he spoke to an empty chair, pretending that it was a Democrat or it was Obama or something like that, and it's real weird and it's real senile, and that was when a lot of people were like, the fuck is Clint Eastwood doing?
I get that vibe about him. He's like the same with Jim Carrey, Yeah,
Jim Carrey is a bit strange.
Actors who have done some really cool stuff, but now the more I learn about their personal and political lives, I'm like,
yeah, how he Jim Carrey's an anti-vax.
Exactly.
And so is Dennis from Always Sunny.
Is he?
Yeah.
Really?
Well, he's look, I'm not pro-vaccination. I just think you should have the right to not vaccinate your children.
Glenn Howerton.
Yeah.
That's wild.
Yeah. There's a Wikipedia page for political life of Clint Eastwood.
Well, as fun as that sounds to read verbatim, I might go into my continue the franchise if that's all good.
Yeah, I'm just trying to see if he's officially pro or anti-Trump. He did discuss. He did talk about how this generation is a pussy generation.
Oh, good terminology. Like, it's sexist as well as being disrespectful to our generation.
But yeah, I think the reason Clint Eastwood still does so much work in Hollywood is he's, as a director, he's not notorious. He's known for coming in under time and under budget. Like, you can, and he'll make a pretty competent film because he's famous for doing one take. And if you'll let me, that actually comes from his like one take thing, and his whole style of directing comes from his experience being on westerns, because he always thought that the role of the director, and back in those days they were very like, oh, you know, here I am, I'm the director, and they're like shouting action and stuff like that. Whereas apparently working with Clint Eastwood these days, you know, you get ready for the scene and he goes, all right, okay, and all right, go ahead, instead of like saying action, because and like this is Tom Hanks was telling the story on Graham Norton, and it's because when Clint Eastwood was working on all these westerns, the directors would shout action and it would spook the horses. And so, and also that they have this like Pavlovian response to the word action, and so they have to like call out other words. And so Clint Eastwood's now like just taken that, and to this day, you know, like what is it, like 50 years after his last western, is still on set, treats his actors like that because of the horses that he was trained around.
Did they have that reaction making a film in New Zealand? And that's why it's Pavlovian. If they had it in Italy, it'd be spaghetti-ian. The spaghetti-ian response.
What did you call spaghetti?
Spagooda.
Spagooda.
Spagooda. All right, my continuing franchise, Richard. I think that The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly would make a pretty cool video game, like a video game remake just of that story. A lot of it is split up into what feels like distinct chapters of a video game, especially like the one that comes to mind immediately is towards the end of the film they have to blow up a bridge for the in the Civil War, and it's like that feels like a, you know, like video games, you've always got to like do a favor for someone to advance your own journey and stuff like that.
Yeah,
like this movie's full of stuff like that. So I reckon The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Do you remember when they released a For Russia with Love PlayStation 2 game? And it was like it was like a love letter to James Bond movies.
Okay,
and stuff
so essentially you're continuing the franchise as Red Dead Redemption.
Yeah, but with the story template of The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, maybe you can play as all three of them.
Yeah, I was going to say, like GTA 5 styles that you could switch between The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, and like yeah, no, that's cool.
Yeah, so that's my idea for Continue the Franchise. Do I need to stop doing this should be a video game as my Continue the Franchise? Because I feel like I've started doing that too often. But it should be a video game. Hey, well, look, Richard, that is it. That's it for this episode of Film Franchise Fortnights. We're going to be calling up the number. Have you got the random number generator in front of you?
Yeah, just getting it ready now.
Cool. Do you want me to pull up the... Shall I tell you what the franchise is this time?
Oh, I've already got the list up.
Oh. All right. Well... All right, Richard, what is the number for the next... Sorry, do we need to explain this? We have a whole numbered list of franchises, and whatever the number on this number generator is going to be the franchise that we cover next.
Okay.
What is it? 11. All right, well, while I look for that, scroll for miles for that, I would just like to remind everybody that you can find Cult Pop Show on Instagram. There's a weird one to start with. Facebook, YouTube, Acast, iTunes, or Apple Podcasts. Wherever you get your podcasts, you can find us.
And also hang out with us on the Little Empire Podcast Pals.
Yeah, true. Do that. That's a Facebook group. Go over to that and check us out there. Or you can email us at cultpoptionmedia@gmail.com. Let us know what you thought of this episode. Get on our Patreon and tell us which series we should watch.
Patreon.
And Richard, I'm looking at franchise number 11, and boy, is this some crazy Destiny shit going on. Do you remember when we did Nymphomaniac?
Yeah.
And we talked about how Kill Bill was the only other example of a franchise that was like one movie split into two.
Yeah.
And then we got Kill Bill as the next franchise.
Yep.
And do you remember when we were doing American Pie and we were talking about how it's not quite as bad as Revenge of the Nerds, and then the next franchise we got was Revenge of the Nerds?
Yep.
And it's like, is God himself watching over this podcast and determined to create a narrative out of the series that we talk about?
And why do you say that, AJ?
Do you remember earlier in this episode, Richard?
I know what the next franchise is.
I know you do.
Yeah.
I'm building it up for the audience.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Do you remember earlier in this episode when we were talking about the Magnificent Seven?
Yes.
Well, that's our next franchise, the Magnificent Seven. Isn't that insane?
That is fucking
We're going to watch more Westerns.
Yeah.
So apparently we've written down here there are 4 films plus a remake. Is that
Let me
still
double check that.
accurate?
One moment. So there's the Magnificent Seven. Although I feel like we should watch, or I know you've seen it, I haven't. I've actually got it on hold at the library at the moment. Is Seven Samurai.
I've seen it.
Yeah, but I feel like we should watch it.
It's so long.
So there's Magnificent Seven. Actually, yeah, there's 4 plus remake. Is that what it says?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's Magnificent Seven, Return of the Seven, Guns of the Magnificent Seven, the Magnificent Seven Ride, and then the 2016 remake, as well as Seven Samurai, as well as A Bug's Life.
A Bug's Life. I feel like A Bug's Life and Seven Samurai are further reading and not part of the franchise.
Well, I mean, because you know, like, this is actually like an official remake of Seven Samurai.
It's so long.
I've been wanting to watch Seven Samurai for so long.
It's so long, and it's so hard to find a version with subtitles.
I just recently, the other day, bought a well, I didn't buy it. I got a library card because they've got a good selection of, you know, books and movies. And so I've ordered a bunch of Kurosawa films because I'm going to Japan later this year. I can't remember if I mentioned that on the podcast yet, but I'm going to Japan.
Nice.
And I want to, you know, take in some Japanese culture. And I've also bought Akira Kurosawa's autobiography. And so I'm going to read that after my current book I'm reading. Because, yeah, I read books now because my job is real boring.
I can't believe we got Magnificent Seven. That's some freaky ass shit, man.
Yeah, man.
I'm not like, So that's number 11. Number 10 is The Hunger Games, and number 12 is The Parent Trap. This is how it could have been anything. It could have been a completely different series.
It's not like all the westerns are next to each other.
yeah, exactly. All right. Well, we'll figure out what we're doing, and if we're going to watch.
Do we need to add it to the Patreon and do a poll?
We could do, yeah.
Since they decided our fate for Spider-Man.
All will be revealed.
Next week.
No, if
then 2 weeks when the episode just comes out.
They're going to just say, yeah, do as many films as possible. That's what happens.
Yeah, well, okay, so now you're the fucking... The tables have turned because for Spider-Man, you were like, no, let's put it to Patreon. I was like, they're just going to vote for more films. And you're like, yeah, but I want to do the more films, so it's fine.
I didn't want to do the more films for Spider-Man.
Yeah, you did. You wanted to talk about Venom.
No, it was more of a duty than a preference.
Well, see, I just think that it's now that you prefer the...
Okay, let me paint the picture of when I first watched Seven Samurai.
Okay.
I have a Facebook group which you should all join called AJ's Movie Club where we vote on a movie.
Refuses to watch Japanese films, and when he does, he complains about them.
What are you talking about?
Well, because you didn't watch Howl's Moving Castle or Your Name.
Yeah, I was real busy that fortnight. Whatever. I've watched more Movie Club movies than you have. Those are the only two I've missed.
I don't have any obligation. It's not my fucking name on there.
Anyway, Magnificent Seven got voted in, and first of all, not only was I like the only person who watched it in the whole club, but I had to like find several versions to watch it all in one go. I had to watch half of it on a Sunday night and then spend all of Monday doing nothing, just watching the rest of the the Seven Samurai, which being in a foreign language means you have to pay full attention to it at all times. I don't really feel like I enjoyed it that much because it was you had to really work. It's 3.5 hours.
Yeah, but like, I mean, I've wanted to watch this movie for so long.
You had your chance.
Huh?
It was voted for on Movie Club.
Yeah, I didn't have time to watch a 3.5 hour movie that week.
All right, everybody. Thank you very much for listening to this episode. We hope you enjoyed it. Hey, look, we cracked an hour.
Let us know if you want to watch Seven Samurai.
Yeah, do that. All right, we'll see you next fortnight for the Magnificent Seven series, and we will see you next week with the second part of the most disappointing films of 2019 so far. Thank you very much, everybody. See you later.
Laters.
Bye.